Just before we get into the next tutorial, here's a couple of bits that I picked up since I did my last video, and they're kind of harking back to earlier things I've shown you. If I go to the grid page on a scene, you can see that for the blue synth the root note is A0, for the yellow synth it's A3, and for the magenta synth it's A3 also. And of course you can change those with the bottom row of knobs as usual. Okay, but what you might not know is this. If I just go back to, I don't know, something like this. If I hold the blue synth engine button down and rotate the screen knob, you'll see top right hand corner the octaves changing. So if I boost that one up to A4 and go to the magenta, same thing, I'll bring that down to A1. Now if I go to the grid page, you should see that they've altered. See, blue is A4 and the magenta is A1. So it's a quick way of changing the octave, if you like, for those synths. But obviously not on the grid page, you need to be on another page. Does it work on the mixer page? Yeah, it does. As soon as you press that synth engine button, you can change the octaves really quickly. So that's a good little trick I picked up. The other very quick thing is if you hold shift and the scene button down, that brings up the list of patches and synth engines. Let's go back. So same as it does if you hold synth and engine. So it's two ways of doing that. So a couple of things here. There's two ways of doing the same thing. Okay, that's good. Let's move on to our next topic, which is the sequencer and the arpeggiator. Right, so press the sequencer mod button, this one here. If I press it again and again, you'll see the various options. So if I go to the blue synth, it's off. Go to the yellow synth, it's off. Go to the purple synth, it's off. So let's go to the blue synth, just this basic acid synth sound. Press the sequencer button again. It now goes into Arpeggiator, and the default type, if I just touch that top right hand knob, is play order. You can change the type obviously, like I'm not going to go through all the options here. Let's go back to play order. Rate is pretty obviously the speed. I'm going to latch this, it's a lot easier to work with, so I hold shift and a button. So the rate pretty obviously changes the speed. Bring it down. That's a sort of triplet feel. Gate length shortens or lengthens the notes. Octave range, pretty obvious. Humanize changes the feel, so it's more sort of like a human. Pretty lumpy and horrible. I don't tend to use that, I must admit. And you've got groove, various options there, and the swing is the shuffle feel of it. So past 50% you get that. Double tap the shift to stop that. Press the sequencer button again and you've got the next option, which is sequencer. By the way, if I go back to Arpeggiator, that's still there, I haven't lost that. So sequencer. Now the sequencer is pretty basic, but it's pretty effective. Basically, it says no sequencer, there's nothing recorded in the sequencer at the moment, and all you do is top right hand knob, turn that to record, like that. So set up like this, every button you play will play back in the order that you play it. So to make a sequence, you play your buttons sequentially, you press shift if you want to rest, and you can have up to 64 steps. So if you like, that's 4 bars of 4/4. Okay, so I've done one there. Turn that back to play. Now if I press the button, It's the same settings for both of those. I hadn't realised that before. So that's probably not what you want, is it? In fact, I'm going to initialise. Right. Okay, so I'm going to go to sequencer. Sequencer, there we go. I'm going to re-record that sequence because I don't want all those weird settings on it, so put it into record. There we go. Turn it back to play. Obviously, whatever pad you play, it will play that sequence from that note upwards or onwards, if you like. So hold Shift and pad, latch in, and then of course you can change the rate, gate length, and so on and so forth. Double tap to stop. You can also move through the options for the sequencer and arpeggiator by turning the top left encoder. So see, off, arp, sequence. It's probably easier just to tap the button. This isn't an in-depth tutorial on the arpeggiator and the sequencer, but it just gives you a little bit of a rough idea. One really good use of the sequencer, apart from actually making music, is to have it running while you're editing. Now if I go to the editing pages, go to the filter maybe, rather than have to keep pressing the pads, you can have the sequencer running. That's pretty handy, isn't it? Just turn the volume up a bit. Try a different engine. Go to fat. Volume down there. You can try different patches just by scrolling down. So it's a very good use of the sequencer, isn't it, apart from the actual normal use in making music. And of course you can do the same thing with the arpeggiator running. So that's the arpeggiator and sequencer, and it's pretty thorough, isn't it? It's pretty good. Let's look at macros now. So what are macros? It's a very powerful feature. Basically each synth in each scene can have 5 macros assigned to it. The idea here is that you assign up to 5 parameters to each of these 3 C knobs, C1, C2, C3, and all parameters will change together when you turn each knob. So you can have 5 parameters on C1, 5 on C2, 5 on C3 for each of the 3 synths. So it's very, very powerful. You can also assign macros to the velocity and the aftertouch stroke pressure. So those macros will work as you press harder on the pads if you've got the pads set so that they are touch sensitive. And you can set the range of the percentage change of each parameter by highlighting the parameter and turning any of the 9 knobs. If I press the top of C1, the macro is timbre. Okay, now if I press in the screen knob and scroll down to macros, you can see the list of macros. Number 1 is called timbre, number 2 is called motion, number 3 is called experiment. So C1, C2, C3, timbre, motion, experiment, and then of course velocity, aftertouch pressure. So let's just click again on timbre, and you can see that we've got 5 possible parameters. 3 of them are empty and 2 have been assigned: filter cutoff and oscillator square mix, and they are set. Filter cutoff to 50%, oscillator square mix to 100%. So if I press back and you can see as I turn the C1 knob, that blue slider is going across and the parameters set on that macro are coming into play. So two parameters are changing at once. Okay, let's look at another macro. Come down again, go to motion, click that, and this is LFO frequency and filter LFO. So let's typical LFO, and of course you can assign more things to those empty slots because they'll all happen at the same time, so that may not be what you want. And you can turn any of these 9 rotaries to change the highlighted percentage. So if I scroll down to filter LFO, any of these knobs will turn and change that percentage. Okay, and you can obviously add other parameters. So if I go to empty slot, select parameter, just press something, go to the filter page, maybe press cutoff, so it's gone straight to that. All I did was touch the top of that encoder, and filter cutoff has been set to the 3rd slot. Okay, so if I bring that up, so when I turn the C2 now, not only am I getting the LFO frequency and the filter LFO changing, I'm also getting the filter cutoff changing. If I go to the filter cutoff, by the way, and I crank the macro, you don't see anything happening to the filter cutoff. All you see is that little readout in the top right hand corner telling you which macro you're using and how much of it you're turning it up by. So I haven't really gone deep into this, but it is a pretty powerful feature. As you can see, once you've changed your macros, you could, if you add something else, I'm going to add select a parameter, anything will do, that'll do, you know, and then go back, and then once I've added that, I could change the name, edit name, click, change the name, you know, save it, etc. So incredibly powerful. You can have 5 parameters set up for each of the 5 macros. That's C1, C2, C3, velocity and aftertouch, and you can have that different for each of the 3 synths. So there's tons and tons of fun to be had with that, of course. I've only kind of lightly touched on this today. One really good thing is you can, let's just get a sequence running on this. Hold shift, play it lower. Now that's good. Let's do the same thing for the yellow synth. Okay, we'll do the same thing for the blue. Now if I hold all 3 synth engine buttons down and crank a macro, whatever's assigned to the macro for those synths will change all at the same time. It's a bit of a mess, admittedly, the way I've done it, but you get the idea. So you can actually have 3 synths macros being operated at the same time, just by holding those 3 down at once and cranking one of the macro buttons. Let's try velocity, shall we? Okay, let's go to macro and see what the velocity is set to. Right, only oscillator volume. Let's add something to the empty slot. Let's do the cutoff. I've got to change the amount of the filter cutoff. Crank that right up. You hear what's happening there? As I'm pressing harder, using more velocity, the filter is opening because I've got it set to 68%, so that's a macro working on the velocity. I'm going to talk about naming finally today. So let's say, for sake of argument, I bring up one of my patches, Glade Runner, and okay, and I just do a little tweak. I just go to the magenta synth, bring the cutoff filter down a bit, maybe the resonance up, like that, something like that. And I want to save this. Press scene button again, save. Now you can see the name is up there, Glade Runner. Now if I start using the machine to put letters or numbers in, that's going to get obliterated. If I want to call this Glade Runner 2, I simply hold shift and then I turn the screen button. I can scroll up and down in the name itself, or I could carry on from there. So if I want to call this Glade Runner 2, now I could just scroll through all of the numbers and letters using the screen knob, which is a bit of a fag. Better is to use the pads. If you look at the pads, they're set out like this is on here. So here we've got these 6 pads lit up, and that is the space bar. It's set up like a QWERTY keyboard. The F and the J are highlighted for reference, so you can find your way around from that. These 2 pads are lit up because that's your caps lock. Up here, top right hand corner, this is the back space, and then where you are, of course, in the screen is lit up in red. So if I simply wanted to call this Glade Runner 2, press the space bar, any of these pads, it moves along 1, and then the 2, number 2 is the second pad along, that's that, and then I could press confirm and that would save it. Let's just show you a different way. Let's go back, let's load another one in. No. Right, so change something, pretend I want to save it, scene, save. If I start typing now with that Les Big Bird selected, it disappears, you see, whatever, and then you go through. So that's a couple of ways of naming. So you can either scroll around with the screen knob, which is pretty long-winded, much better to use the pads as a QWERTY keyboard, and that's how you name things. So that's the end of today's tutorial. I'm very near the end of doing my kind of Polyend Essentials videos. There's one more topic that I want to deal with, and that will need another video, which is MIDI, and that's a fairly big topic. And then perhaps it will be time to spend a few weeks messing around with the machine learning more and going into more detail on some of the synth editing, other things like that. And if you do have any questions, please do get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to help if I can. Of course, Polyend themselves are very, very helpful, and there are loads of other videos on YouTube to watch. Anyway, thanks for watching this one, and you'll see me in my next one.